Okay, welcome back to Peak by Roland Smith. We're going to read chapter 9, same writing prompt from 8. In chapters 8 and 9, tell how you think Peak is reacting to the news that he is going to climb Everest. What are some of his thoughts and feelings? All right, chapter 9. It's called Gear of the Dead. The next morning, after a huge breakfast in the dining room, I came back upstairs and I started sorting through the gear. All the stuff didn't make up for all the birthdays and Christmases Josh had neglected, but it came pretty darn close. It was all state-of-the-art equipment, most of which I'd only seen advertised in climbing magazines. Camp stove, coils of rope, cams, titanium ice axe, crampons, thermal gloves, digital camera, O2 regulator and face mask, tent, sub-zero sleeping bags, sleeping pad, altimeter watch, carabiners, batteries, ascenders, pitons, harnesses, climbing helmet, headlamp, everything I needed to get through the death zone. Most of the clothes were too small, especially the boots. I suppose Josh couldn't have asked my mother for my sizes without tipping her off. And he couldn't have asked me because until I passed that physical, he wasn't sure that I was even going, which got me to wondering, what would he have done if I had failed the physical? Yeah, but only for a moment. The gear called to me. And nothing matters when you are up to your knees in brand new, expensive climbing equipment. It took me 2 hours to figure out how the altimeter watch worked, an hour to set up the tent. I faced it with the opening toward the window so I could see the Himalayas. I snapped a couple of photos of the view with the digital camera. Then I got hungry and decided rather than going down to the dining room, I'd just cook up some food on my brand new camp stove. Yeah, I know that sounds goofy, but I get a little out of control when it comes to gear. I opened the window so I didn't set off the carbon monoxide poisoning. As the freeze-dried beef stroganoff was simmering away, there was a knock on my door. I thought it was housekeeping again. They had come by earlier asking to clean the room, but I told them that I had everything I needed and to come back tomorrow. I slithered out of the tent, carefully stepped over the stove so I didn't tip it over and burn down the hotel, cracked open the door, hoping they wouldn't smell the gas burning and the food cooking. It wasn't the housekeeper. It was a Nepalese boy, about my age, but 2 inches shorter. He was smiling up at my head, which is all I had revealed through the crack. Below my head, I had nothing on but my boxers, because I had been trying on gear all day, and it was getting hot in the room from the stove and the sun coming through the window. "Peak Wood?" he asked. "Actually, it's Peak Marcello, but yeah, that's me. My name is Sanjo. Zopa sent me over to bring you to him." Sure, I glanced at the mess behind me. I didn't want to leave him standing in the hallway while I got ready, which was going to take a while. Appearing like a total idiot, won over, being rude, I let him in. Sanjo looked a bit shocked at the setup, but he didn't burst out laughing, which I might have done if I had stumbled onto somebody equally as stupid looking as my indoor camping spot. My dad, Josh got me some new gear and I was, testing it out so I would know. Forget it, I thought. "I'm just making some lunch. Are you hungry?" Sanjo said that he was. As I got dressed, I watched him checking out the equipment and I knew that he was a climber. No one else would fondle the gear so lovingly. He picked up various items like they were more valuable than gold, which they were when they were the only thing keeping you from falling off a rock face and into the dark bottomless crevice. I cleared a spot for us in the bed and I served him a bowl of stroganoff and an energy bar for dessert. It turned out that Sanjo's father had been a Sherpa. Unfortunately, he had died up on K2 the previous year trying to rescue a group of climbers. Only one of the climbers had survived. K2 was discovered in 1856 by a surveyor named T.G. Montgomery. The K stands for Karakoram, and the 2 means it was the second peak Montgomery listed on his survey. At 28,250 feet, it's a bit shorter than Everest, but most climbers agree it's a lot harder to reach the summit. I told Sanjo how sorry I was to hear about his father, but he shrugged it off, saying he hardly knew his dad. He and his 2 younger sisters had spent most of their lives at a private boarding school in northern India. "My sisters and I only came back to Kathmandu on holiday," he said. "My father was usually up on the mountain during those times." Hearing about his sisters caused a little ache in my belly for Paula and Patrice, but it went away as I watched Sanjo casually tie a length of spectra cord to a hex slung with a triple fisherman's knot. "Where did you learn to climb?" I asked. "My grandfather instructed me," he answered. His English was better than mine. He had a kind of British Indian accent. Mine was kind of Bronx, Cody, Wyoming accent, which did not sound nearly as cool and refined as his. So, are you on holiday? No, Sanjo answered. When my father died, we did not have the funds to keep all three of us in school. The tuition is very expensive. My sisters are still in school, and I am here to find work so they can stay there. Without a formal education, there is no future for girls in Kathmandu. I would like to go back to school myself, but it is unlikely I will be able to. It is more important that my sisters attend school than it is for me. Sanjo wasn't much older than I was, and I wondered what kind of job he could get that would pay the tuition. He looked at my altimeter watch, which he had been playing with throughout lunch. We should leave soon. Zopa is waiting for us at the Indrani temple. I turned off the stove and I put the dishes in the bathroom sink. Did you know there is a dining room here in the hotel? Sanjo asked. I have not dined there myself, but I hear it is quite excellent. Yeah, I ate there this morning. It's great. The reason I cooked, well, you know, the new gear. Sanjo just smiled. He knew exactly what I was talking about. Our transportation to the temple was the saddest motorcycle I had ever seen. There was more silver duct tape on it than chrome. It took him 6 vicious kicks to get it started, and when it finally caught, the motorcycle belched out a column of gray smoke so thick I thought the bike had just burst into flames, along with my new friend. But the smoke cleared, revealing a coughing Sanjo with tears running down his face and a mostly intact motorcycle, except for the bolt lying in a pool of oil under the engine. It is much better when we are moving forward, he gasped. In this way, the smoke cannot catch us. I thought about running up to the room and grabbing my climbing helmet, but I was afraid Sanjo might die of asphyxiation before I got back out. So I climbed on behind him, and then we lurched into traffic. Sanjo yelled something that sounded like, only 2 root beers last go, but I think he meant that the motorcycle only had 2 foot gears, fast and slow. He was right about our exhaust being behind us. The problem was that we were now speeding through everyone else's exhaust. For the next 20 minutes, I squeezed shut my burning eyes and I buried my face in his back, thereby missing most of Kathmandu. We had arrived, Sanjo announced. I unclutched my sweaty hands and I opened my eyes. You must remove your shoes before entering the temple. I took them off and I put them next to about 50 other pairs of shoes and sandals. If you don't mind my asking, Sanjo said, what happened to your face? It got frozen to a building. Sanjo laughed. No, really. Climbing accident, I said. That's what I thought. I followed him into the Indrani temple, which was like walking into another world. One where people whispered rather than shouted. There was no wandering cows. We had narrowly missed 3 of them on our way here. No horns honking, no screeching tires. The smell of flowers and incense saturated the air. Worshippers were kneeling in front of shrines, spinning prayer wheels, lighting butter lamps. Mystery, possibilities. This was the Kathmandu that I had expected. Sanjo led me to a teak bench in the shade of a banyan tree. We sat for a while watching the orange-robed monks, talking quietly to visitors and offering them blessings. Which one is Zopa? I whispered. None of these. Shouldn't we let him know that we're here? Sanjo shook his head. He'll be along when he's ready. Waiting again, but I didn't mind. I spent the time trying to figure out how to gracefully bow out of a return trip to the hotel on the death motorcycle. Here he comes, Sanjo said. I expected Zopa to be a frail, old holy man, and the monk striding toward us was old, but he was anything but frail. His arm and calf muscles, what I could see of them beneath the hem of his orange robe, were well-defined and powerful. You'd expect a Buddhist monk to have a spiritual presence, but whatever spirituality Zopa had was overwhelmed by his physical presence. When he reached us, he put his palms together and bowed. I followed Sanjo's lead by getting to my feet and returning the bow. Zopa looked me over, frowning at the scabs on my face and ear. Climbing accident, Sanjo explained. Zopa pointed at my bandaged fingers. Split nails, I explained nervously. They're almost healed. You look like your father, Zopa said. Actually, I look more like my mother, but I wasn't about to disagree with him. How did you get here? Motorcycle, Sanjo said. Zopa shook his head in disgust. When you go back, take a taxi. He reached in to a fold in his robe, and he came out with a roll of rupees as big as his fist. I didn't think Buddhist monks were supposed to look at money. He peeled off half an inch of bills and handed them to Sanjo. What about my motorcycle? Sanjo asked. If you are lucky, Zopa said, someone will steal it. Wait for me at the hotel. The monk turned and walked away. I was relieved about the taxi, but that didn't explain why we had come all the way down to the Indrani temple. When I asked Sanjo about it, he just shrugged and said, Zopa had his own way of doing things. Mysterious ways, as it turned out, because when we got back to the hotel, Zopa was already waiting for us in the lobby. I didn't recognize him at first because the orange robe had been replaced by regular street clothes and an expensive-looking pair of sunglasses. The sunglasses made him look like kind of a celebrity, which I suppose he was to the trekkers and climbers gathered around him. It had taken us 10 minutes tops to catch a taxi outside the temple. We drove straight to the hotel. The traffic wasn't any worse than it had been on the motorcycle on the way to the temple, and yet there was Zopa, chatting with the hotel staff and guests as if he'd been there all afternoon. I looked at Sanjo, expecting him to be as shocked as I was, but he wasn't. Zopa does things like that, he said. How? Another shrug, which I learned later was everyone's answer to questions about Zopa. You'll get used to it, Sanjo added. Then he went over and greeted the vacationing monk. Now you're probably wondering why I didn't ask Zopa myself. Believe me, I was tempted, but I didn't think he would tell me. Or worse, he might give me some reasonable explanation. It's sort of like asking a magician to tell you how he does his trick, or asking a tagger how he got those 7 freight cars painted in a single night. It's all about the mystery. Sometimes it's better not to ask. Up in the room, Zopa sorted through the gear, putting it in different piles while Sanjo and I watched. Once in a while, he would stop and have me try something on, saying, fits or doesn't fit. When he was finished, there were 3 piles. He pointed to one of the piles. We will take this and trade for things that fit. My boots, blue snowsuit, and several other items of clothing were in the separate pile with some other stuff. I pointed out that none of these things in that pile fit either. I have another use for it, Zopa said. I didn't know what that could be, but I didn't pursue it. Instead, I pointed to the trade pile, which had several $100s worth of pitons, cams, ropes, and other expensive equipment. This gear is brand new, I said. You won't need it to get up Sagarmatha. That is what the Nepalese call Everest. My dad bought it, I argued. He might need it. Your father told me to make sure you have everything you need to climb the mountain. How much money do you have? I told him, but I didn't mention the credit card Mom had given me. I didn't think she'd be happy about a huge bill for Everest gear. It's not enough to get the things we will need, Zopa said. Hopefully we will be able to trade all this. He started to gather up the gear from the trade pile. Best not to argue, Sanjo whispered, and he and I helpfully hauled the gear downstairs, where a Toyota truck and a driver was waiting for us. It took hours to get the replacement gear. In the process, I got quite a tour of Kathmandu. It seemed that most of the places Zopa liked to shop were located down dark, scary alleys. He was warmly greeted wherever we went, until the bartering started, and when the proprietor would end up in a shouting match until a bargain was struck. The most difficult things to find were my boots. I'd try on a pair I liked, tell Zopa they fit great. Then he would make me walk and shake his head. Not right, he'd say. What do you mean? I'd insist. They fit great. Too small, he'd say. But when your toes fall off inside from the swelling and the pinching, they will fit perfectly. We finally agreed on a pair that didn't fit great, but they were pretty battered up on the outside. In fact, all the stuff we bought was banged up. I hope this gear wasn't taken from dead climbers, I said offhandedly. Zopa looked horrified. Bad luck to use gear of the dead. No, this is from people who come to Kathmandu to climb and decide it is better to stay in the bar and drink. I must have looked horrified myself. Don't think ill of them, he said. They lived. Zopa also bought a few things for himself and Sanjo, who I guessed was coming up to base camp, by the gear he was getting. Unlike me, he listened carefully to Zopa's opinions and bowed every time the monk gave him something. It was late when we got back to the hotel. We went up to the room, packed everything, then loaded it in the truck. We leave for Tibet tomorrow morning at 6, Zopa said. He and Sanjo got into the truck and drove away. Okay, that was chapter 9, called The Gear of the Dead, and you were